All right, well, this morning we're going to wrap up our series in the book of Colossians. We call it Shaken. Shaken Lessons in Colossians, because we talked about how the city of Colossae was once a kind of vibrant and important key rest stop, kind of a refill, refresh station along the main key trade route east and west. It's located in modern-day Turkey, and so it's kind of like this, again, this main trade route between the east and the west, between Rome and Greece in the west, and Persia and India and China to the east. And so kind of in this little section of Turkey, you kind of have, we talked about these three cities, so they're all connected to each other, Hierapolis, Laodicea, and Colossae, and how they're all facing similar struggles. Because they're having to deal with, okay, we believe in Jesus, but there's all these other beliefs and ideas that are coming from all these different directions, and here they're kind of like crashing into each other. And so what do we do? How do we live our faith in a world where our culture is kind of shaking us and telling us to believe different things? And Colossae, we said, was once kind of the prominent town, but when the Romans built their kind of inner empire, if you will, road system, they bypassed Colossae and made the new hub Laodicea. As you can see, it's kind of the crossroads, the spaghetti junction of the trade routes. And so Colossae began to decline, and it began to fall off. And so these three cities, actually this guy named Epaphras, he's the one who planted all three of these churches. He learned about Jesus in Ephesus during Paul's ministry there, brought the gospel news to these three cities. And so now he's kind of going, well, what do I do? What do I tell these young believers? How do they stand firm in the midst of a culture that's kind of shaking things up? And so he actually leaves Colossae. He travels 1,300 miles to Rome, and he goes, hey, Paul, you're kind of my mentor. You're kind of my spiritual leader, my spiritual father. Like, what should I tell them? How should they respond? And so Paul sits down and he writes a letter. The letter of Colossians. He's saying, hey, let me give you some help. Let me give you some counsel. Let me give you some kind of ideas on how to stand firm in the midst of shaking. And we talked about how in the first kind of couple chapters, we see Paul over and over and over again use these words like wisdom, knowledge, understanding. He's like, you believers, if you're going to stand firm, you have to know what you believe. As a follower of Jesus, what do you believe? And he's saying, here are the core tenets of what you need to understand is that God has rescued us from the dominion of darkness. You need to understand that God has purchased our freedom, that God has forgiven our sins, that God has transferred us into the kingdom of the Son he loves. And these are all things that we could not do on our own strength or our own power, our own ability, and therefore God did on our behalf, and he did it through Jesus. And so he's saying, hey, you need to understand what Jesus has done for you. And you need to say, Jesus, you are supreme. You are the highest power and authority. You are more significant than all these other things that we hear. It's all human teachings. It's all human ideas, human theories, but this one is from God. And therefore, Jesus is higher. And so we need to listen to Jesus. We need to understand Jesus above all these other things. Otherwise, we're going to get shaken. And we need to be aware. We need to see that so that we aren't deceived. And last week, if you're here, we talked about, you need to perceive so that you're not deceived. You need to see what's going on in the world around you and pay attention so that you don't fall victim to the predator who's going to drag you off into the woods, prey, in order to consume and devour you and destroy you. You got to stand firm. Well, this morning, Paul is going to get what I would call intensely practical. He's going to say, okay, people, based on all these things I've talked about, what God has done for us, what Jesus has done for us, who Jesus is, so kind of like, well, now what? Now what do we do? And so if you have a Bible, if you want to turn to it, we're going to be in Colossians chapter 3 predominantly. If not, you can look at the screens. But here's what he says in chapter 3, verse 1. He says, since then you have been raised with Christ, raised from the dead with Jesus. Set your hearts on things above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. It's interesting, in the original Greek, it might actually better be translated if. If then you have been raised with Christ. If you believe, based on what the basis of what God has done for us, if you believe that you have been raised with Christ from the dead, then set your hearts on things above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God the Father Almighty, really. And I like this word set, because here's what this word means in the Greek. It means to seek. It means search for. It means desire. It means require. It means demand. He's saying, set your hearts on things above, seek things above, search for things above, desire things above, require and demand things above. heavenly things where Jesus is sitting on his throne. Think about those kinds of things. That's what you need to set your heart on. If you really have been raised from the dead into a whole new life, a whole new resurrected reality that didn't exist before Jesus, then you need to kind of keep your eyes fixed on that. Don't keep it fixed on what's going on here. Keep it fixed on that. Jesus died and was raised to life to give you more, to give you better, to give you higher. You know, before Kimberly and I got married, we got married in 1996, my grandfather, who was sick at the time, this was right before he passed away, but we were hoping that my grandfather would make it to our wedding and play a part in our wedding because he was kind of like a spiritual father to me, a grandfather. He was kind of like the guy that I could look at and say, man, this guy has been pursuing Jesus, following Jesus, chasing after Jesus his entire life. He was a pastor. He was so compassionate and kind. Like he was basically to me as a kid growing up, he was like, here's this living, breathing example of what it looks like to follow Jesus. And so we were hoping that he would get to play a part in our wedding ceremony for our big day. But a couple months before our big day, my grandpa had his big day, and he passed away and he entered glory. And he entered the throne room of God where he could see him face to face like we sang earlier. He was experiencing glory, right? And I'm so happy in hindsight because I didn't know he was going to pass away at the time, but we kind of knew it was getting towards the end. And so I thought, well, I'm not going to be there because he's 500 miles away, and so I can't be down there when this is happening. And so I'm like, I want to write my grandfather a letter, and I'm going to send it to him. And so basically it's First Grandpa Indians, my letter, right? And in my letter, I'm like, I want to encourage you, Grandpa. And so I picked a verse and one that's very similar to the one we just read and sent it to him to encourage him, and also had the opportunity afterwards to share this passage at his memorial service. But this is what I kind of wanted to emphasize with my grandfather as he was getting towards the end. 2 Corinthians 4, verse 16, in case you're wondering, it says, therefore, we do not lose heart. Anybody here losing heart? Therefore, we do not lose heart, though outwardly we are wasting away. Yet inwardly we are being renewed, made new each and every day, day by day. For all of our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So, we fix our eyes, we fix our attention, we fix our gaze not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. Since what is seen, it's temporary. But what is unseen, it's eternal. It's eternal. The new heavenly perspective and reality we need to embrace is everything in this earthly life is temporary. It's not going to last. It's here today and it's gone tomorrow. Temporary. So, fix your eyes not on the temporary, on what you can see, but what is eternal. What's going to last forever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever. That's where you need to fix your attention and fix your gaze and set your heart on those kinds of things. Because if you don't, if you fix your eyes on everything that's right here in the muck and the mire and the mess and the mud of this earthly life, then you're probably going to lose heart. But if you fix your eyes and your gaze and your attention on things above, then you won't. You won't. My grandpa had his hope. He had his eyes. He had his heart set on things above, on eternity. And because he did, it had an impact in his present circumstances because his prize was not some earthly thing that you could see. His prize was in heaven. It was glory. It was being with God because of what Jesus has done for us. That's where his prize was. It wasn't some earthly trinket that could be taken away from him. His hope, his heart, his gaze was on what was going to last. Well, Paul continues in Colossians 3:2. He says this, hey, set your minds on things above, not on earthly things. If you're paying attention, you might be like, what? time out. Is Paul, like, is he getting kind of old? Like, is he forgetting what he just said? He just said, set your hearts on things above. And now the next verse, he's saying, set your minds on things above. Is he like Dory in Finding Nemo, and he like has short-term memory loss? Does he not remember he just said that when she's like, did we just meet? Is that Paul? Is he like, hey, set your heart on things above, and dang it, I lost my train of thought. Set your minds on things above. Is he saying the same thing, or is he trying to say something distinctly different? Well, this time Paul uses a different Greek word. This time it's the word phroneo, which means to have understanding. It means to think, to direct your mind towards, to direct your intellect towards. And so what is he telling us to set our minds on this time? Have understanding of things above, not earthly things. Think about things above, not earthly things. Direct your mind towards things above, not earthly things. Direct your intellect towards things above, not just the earthly things that are temporary and seen and aren't going to last. Think about these things. For some believers, many of us in this room perhaps, we come to faith based on our feelings, on our emotions, on how we feel in the moment, on our gut, right? And others maybe in this room, and others, they come to God more with their mind, with kind of like their heart, with their intellect over their heart, kind of with their intelligence or their rationale or their reasonings. Maybe some of you have read the books, Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis. It's kind of this idea of, hey, pursue God with your mind because it'll lead you to God. Or maybe Lee Strobel, Case for Christ, it's like came to God with his mind. When we go to Israel, we do a study tour every couple years, and my buddy Frank kind of co-leads them with me. And every single time we get to the Dead Sea, we go to this place called Qumran. And in Qumran is where they discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls, which is physical archaeological evidence that certain passages of Scripture, like Messianic prophecy, like Isaiah 53 or Psalm 22, were written hundreds of years before Jesus entered the scene. And so my buddy Frank, he's like, how do I rationalize, how is it possible for these verses that are clearly talking about Jesus and crucifixion, how can I reconcile that they were written 700 years before Jesus? How is that possible? And his mind goes, well, this means that this thing must be true, and they were prophetically true. And so my buddy Frank, he came to God, Jesus, with his mind. He kind of weighed all the options. He looked at all the different views, and he said, this is the one that makes the most sense. And so when we get to Qumran, he looks at this cave where some of the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, and he points at it, and he goes, if it weren't for this cave, I would not be a follower of Jesus. Because he's coming to God with his mind. But Paul, he doesn't say set your minds only on things above. He also says set your hearts on things above. He's saying you need to do both. It's not just a feelings thing. It's not just an emotional thing, but it's also not just a head thing. It's a heart and a head thing. It's these two things coming together and merging together. That's what your faith is. It's got to be a heart thing and it's got to be a mind thing. So set your minds and your hearts on things above, not on all these earthly temporary things, seen things. No, set it on things above. And that's why Jesus, when they asked him, hey, Jesus, what's the greatest command? What was his response? Matthew 22:37, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. Did he say, love the Lord your God with all your heart, or all your soul, or all your mind? Pick one of the three. Is that what he said? No, he's like, all the above. Set your heart and your mind on things above, not on earthly things, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. It's both. Colossians 3:3 says this. Here's what you need to understand, people. For you died. Did you hear that? What'd you do? You died. You died. And your life, your current earthly breathing life, is now hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, appears, then you also will appear with him in glory. You see, because of Jesus, your future is set in its glory, like my grandfather is currently experiencing right now, like my father is currently experiencing right now. He is in glory. But the resurrection reality in life doesn't begin when I die. He's saying, you know when it begins? It can begin right now. Today. Now. Live in light of that being your future, and it can transform your life today, not just at the end of your life, but in your life. It can transform your earthly temporal life now. You don't have to wait for it. So seek for, search for, desire and demand your future resurrection life now. Today. In this earthly life. Because all this stuff that you're dealing with, it's all temporary. That's the only thing that's going to last. So fix your eyes there. Set your heart and your mind there. Not just on all the muck. Don't settle for less than what God has for you. So I'm telling you, I feel like this may be the biggest thing for believers today is we settle for far, far, far less in this current resurrected life than what Jesus died to give us. And we're like, this is good enough. And he's like, that's not even close to what I have for you. I have so much more, so much higher, so much better, so much more significant. Experience it now. Don't just wait till you die, enter glory. So how do we take a hold of this resurrected life now, ahead of time, if you will? Well, Colossians 3:5, he gives us some advice. It says, put to death. Put to death, therefore, whatever belongs to your earthly nature. He starts listing off these things: sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires, greed, which is idolatry. It's because of these things that the wrath of God is coming. And by the way, you used to walk in these ways in the life you once lived, but that life is now what? It's now dead. But now you must also rid yourselves of all such things as these. Get rid of anger, get rid of rage, get rid of malice and slander and filthy language from your lips. Do not lie to each other, since you have taken off your old self with its practices and have put on the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge in the image of its creator. You're being transformed and renewed to look more and more like Jesus. The fancy word for that is sanctification. And he's saying you got to put on the new self and you got to get rid of the old self. That's what you need to do. And I don't know which one it is for you, but I have a feeling that when we go through that list, there's something on there that you are currently struggling with or have struggled with that you need to put to death. Put it to death. Sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires, greed, idolatry, lying. He's like, you got to kill those things in your life. That's the old life, the old nature, the here and now, the not fixing your eyes on the what's coming, but on what's now. And you're going to lose heart. Don't seek after these things. And once you rid yourselves of all these kinds of things, then what do you need to do? Colossians 3:10, second part. Put on the new self. Put on the new self. I want you to think of a time for a moment, like when in your life were you just like physically dirty, okay, not spiritual dirty, physically dirty, nasty, gross, smelly, stinky, whatever word you want to use, that was you, okay? On Wednesday night, my youngest son, Capo, he's 6th grade now, so he went to Emerge a couple weeks ago, which means on Wednesday night was his very first Surge, his very first middle school youth group night, which is kind of a big deal for us, and we're like, woohoo, you're going to middle school youth group, like, this is going to be amazing, you now get to be a part of Surge, right? Well, all this new stuff for him made me think about my first time in middle school youth group because I grew up in a mobile church, and so our church had bought some property, I think maybe 5th grade, and then we finished the building, I think probably 8th grade or towards 9th grade. And so when I started middle school, junior high in California, 7th grade, we didn't have a building, we just had some property. And so it was just this dirt field with kind of a pit in the back. And so our youth leaders are like, hey, we're going to have our first youth group night of the summer. Hey, all you new 7th graders, you can come. Parents, drop them off. Make sure they bring a change of clothes. And we're going to have I don't know what they call it, like yuck night or muck night or disgusting. I don't know what it was, right? And so here's what they did. We show up, and they had gone to like every restaurant in the Irvine area, which is where I grew up. And they said, hey, do you have any rotten food? Can we just have it? And so literally they bought like buckets of mashed potatoes that were like green, okay? Like moldy mashed potatoes, a bucket of tomatoes that were just totally rotten peaches, rotten whatever, rotten fish, I don't know, just nasty, everything was nasty. Rotten eggs that were way past their expiration date and were kind of like getting black. And they put them all in the middle, and so it's kind of like Hunger Games, remember Hunger Games, when everybody like goes in the middle and the cornucopia and then, battle. They put it all in the middle, and they got this big fire hose, and they kind of like muddied up the whole like pit. And they said, go. And so we just went down in there, and we were just slinging mud and mashed potatoes and throwing rotten eggs at each other and tomatoes. And it was downright disgusting, okay? But also totally awesome, right? You know how it can be both of those at the same time? But I will tell you, like when you take like rotten egg to the face or a mashed potato and it kind of like drips down into your, right? You kind of like, oh, right? And it's just not good. And so can you imagine, you're the parent, it's like, hey, they're going to have yuck night, bring a change of clothes, right? And you show up at the end of the night, and I don't know if Mom, you remember this or not, and you're like, you're not getting in this car. I'm sorry, but you are disgusting, and you smell gross, and you're 15 feet away, and I can smell you. Roll up the window, walk home, right? And so they're like, hey, take that fire hose and just, spray them off as much as you can, take off your clothes, all that, right? Can you imagine if at the end of yuck night, muck night, whatever you want to call it, gross night, I'm just covered in mud and egg and mashed potatoes and tomatoes and all that. And I'm like, oh, I got some new clothes. And I just put them on over the dirty clothes. Is that going to work? I'm just like, okay, well, I got some new clothes on. I'm good to go, Mom. No, that's not going to work. That's kind of what Paul is saying here. He's like, your old life, it's kind of smelly and nasty and gross. You need to take it off and get rid of it. Like, burn that thing. Like, we're not even bringing that thing home and trying to wash it with Downy or Tide or whatever. Like, that thing is done, right? Just throw it straight in the trash can. It's done. It's over. That's your old life. And your old pattern of thinking, your old way of thinking is like, take it off. Put it to death. And after you've taken it off and put it to death, then, and only then, should you try to do what? Put on the new clothes. Put on the new. First, you got to get rid of the nasty, and then you can put on the new. Don't put on the new over the nasty, because that's just doesn't really do much. No, take off the old before you put on the new. And so what is the new and improved, resurrected reality, things above, setting my heart and my mind on? What does that look like? Colossians 3. Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves, putting on the new self. Clothe yourselves with compassion. Clothe yourselves with kindness. Clothe yourselves with humility. Clothe yourselves with gentleness. Clothe yourselves with patience. Bear with each other. When this person is annoying the crud out of you, bear with them. And forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone. I'm sure everybody here has a grievance with somebody, probably me at some point. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. And over all these virtues, all these different things, you need to put on, clothe yourself in love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. It's like the thing that holds all these other things together is love. Love for each other. You need to clothe yourself in this. I'm pretty sure most of you, when you got up this morning, I won't do a hands up on this one, but I'm pretty sure most of you took a shower, and then you went to your closet, your walk-in closet, your drawers, whatever you did, and you chose the clothes that you are currently wearing. I did not. Because Kimberly, my wife, my partner, she has said, Aaron, you dress the same way. If it was up to me on a Sunday morning, this would be it, okay? Plaid and jeans every single Sunday. You've been doing that for 8 years, so now you need to change it up some. And so now she just like picks for me, right? But most of us as adults, we pick what we wear. And so when you got up this morning, and some of you guys did a good job, some of you guys, debatable, you chose whatever you are wearing this morning. You chose the shirt, you chose the dress, you chose the skirt, the pants, the shorts, you chose the shoes, you chose the socks, you chose the accessories. You chose it. You chose it. It was your pick. Paul is saying the same thing. It's like when you wake up each day, decide what you're going to wear, choose to wear compassion. Choose to wear kindness. Choose to wear humility. Choose to wear these things. Let this be the kind of attitude and perspective you choose to wear today. Choose to be gentle. Choose to be patient. Choose to bear with annoying people. Choose to forgive others just as God forgave you. Choose to love other people. Take off the old self and put on the new resurrected reality self. You know, some of us, we're often ruled by our emotions and by our feelings, and we use this as a scapegoat or a way out, saying, well, this is how I feel, and therefore this is what I have to do, and therefore we just do whatever we feel. And Paul's like, that's your old self. That's the death you need to put to death, because your new reality is that you can choose. And I'm not just a victim to whatever has happened to me, and therefore I just have to do whatever I feel. No. Your feelings don't rule you. It's your heart and your mind, and therefore choose. Choose to wear these things. Others of us, we kind of think like this is something that God just does to us, and we're just like these helpless people, like a mannequin, and we're just sit there, and God's just going to make it happen for us. And he's like, no, that's not true either. You can choose to wear these things. So you play a part in this. This isn't just something done to you, and you're just like this passive person that's just happening to, and sanctification is just going to happen to you magically. He's saying you play a role in that because you choose to wear these things. And you choose what you set your heart and your mind and your focus and your attention and your eyes on. I'm not deciding that for you. You're deciding it for yourself. So you play a part in this. It doesn't say be clothed with compassion because God's just you're going to wear compassion whether you want to or not. No. Choose to wear compassion. Being made new, taking a hold of new resurrected life now, while in this temporary earthly life and not just when you die. Go ahead and get started now. Why would you not want to do it now? See, I think there's a real danger for us. And I think the danger for us as believers is that we settle for far, far less than what God has for us. And we can use whatever excuse we want, but usually it's because we have our hearts and our minds, and it's split. And we're saying, I have my heart and my mind set on things above, and yet I also have my heart and my mind set on things below, on unseen and seen, on earthly and heavenly, and we're like in the middle. And we can't really enjoy this because we're still attracted to this, and we can't really enjoy this because when we do, we feel guilty because of this, and we know we shouldn't be, and so we're just in the middle, and we're a hot mess. Because we think we can have it both ways. And he's saying, you got to go all in, people. You got to set your heart and mind on things above and not on earthly things, not 50-50 split. It's like, no, you got to go all the way. And so we live in this tug of war between our emotions and our heart and our mind and what we're focused on and what we're putting our attention on, what we put our gaze on, what we fix our eyes on, and we're just kind of like all over the place. And I wonder if he's like, you know what? If you want to experience the resurrected life today and not just in the future, you can go ahead and start that, but you're going to have to start by fixing your eyes on heavenly things and not on the earthly things. Because all this is temporary, and it's all going to go away, and this is the only thing that's going to last. So why would you stay stuck down here? Fix your eyes over here on what's going to last. That's what we need to do. And so we kind of settle for what I would call purgatory. We're stuck. We're stuck in purgatory between these two things. We were saying, well, Jesus, you're the way, you're the truth, and you're the life. But the world says this is the way, the truth, and the life. But this is what he says. This is what he says. And then we're just kind of like, which way do I go? And we just live in this chaos and confusion, in this mediocrity, never experiencing the full and abundant life that Jesus died to give us and give us today and not just tomorrow. And I've shared several times how these three cities, Colossae, Laodicea, and Hierapolis, are all connected. They're interlinked. They're facing the same struggles. Epaphras has been contending, as Paul says, for all three of these cities. Colossians 4:13, he says this, I vouch for him, this is Paul about Epaphras, that he is working hard for you and for those at Laodicea and for those at Hierapolis. And then at the very end of the letter of Colossians, I don't know if you realize this or not, but Paul says, hey, here's what I want you to do, people. He says, after this letter has been read to you, Colossians, see that it is also read in the church of who? The Laodiceans, and that you, in turn, read the letter from the Laodicea. So he's like, hey, after you read Colossians, I want you to pass it on to the Laodiceans so they can hear the same exact counsel and word because they're struggling with all the same things as you are. So make sure they read it too. Does that make sense? Well, historically, here's what happens. 25, 30 years pass, okay? Paul is gone. Almost all of them are gone. Only John, the apostle, is left. And John sits down, he writes a letter, and it's called Revelation. If you ever read the beginning of Revelation, it says, to the churches in Asia, and it lists off 7 churches in Asia. And these are the 7 churches that he mentions. Smyrna, Ephesus, Pergamos, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. Anybody see what's missing? Colossians. Colossians is the one of these out of 2. There's 2 of them that have letters written to them, but Colossae doesn't make the list. Curious, but which one does? Laodicea. Laodicea makes the list. And of these 7 churches, church theologians and Bible scholars, they try to figure out, okay, the Revelation is written to these 7 churches, and they kind of theorize. They're like, okay, these 7 churches represent 7 types of churches that will exist during the time of Christianity. So this could be describing different types of churches and their struggle and what they're dealing with. Other scholars and theologians believe that this actually is the 7 stages of church history, where it's like they're actually listed in order. And so it's like, here's what the church is going to be like in general during the apostolic era, and that's Ephesus. And they're in the period of persecution. It's going to be Smyrna, and then it's Pergamum. And this is kind of the general feeling of the church in general worldwide, which means Laodicea is the last one. So if this is the 7 stages of church history, that means when do we live right now? We're Laodicea. We're Laodicea. Other people, I think you could argue, is these 7 churches represent 7 styles of churches, 7 types of churches, could also represent 7 types of believers and kind of their struggle and what they're dealing with. And if you kind of look at if you've read Revelation, you realize that most of the time they're like, hey, this is good for you, you got this going for you, but this is where you struggle and where you could work on. And then he gets to Laodicea and he's like, I got nothing good. I got nothing good to say about you because you have some serious issues going on. And you have become totally self-absorbed, you're rich, you're wealthy, but it's not good. It's not good. Geographically, if you look at the map, Laodicea, Hierapolis, Colossae. Which one's in the middle? Laodicea is in the middle. Stuck in the middle. And here's what's interesting about Laodicea being in the middle, is that Laodicea, it didn't really have a whole real good source of fresh water. And so I had to kind of basically pump the water to Laodicea because it's such a big city. And so I had to aqueduct the water in. And so they had 2 sources of water, and they just happened to be Hierapolis and Colossae. Here's the thing about Hierapolis. Hierapolis was basically the mineral springs. It was the hot springs. It's where you went to go in the jacuzzi tub and get to relax. In fact, on Facebook a couple weeks ago, I saw this ad, if you will, and it was saying, hey, the top 10 places to take a dip in a pool in the world. And guess what number 9 was? Hierapolis. Hierapolis today. It's got this mineral deposits. It's beautiful. There's like these little pools. In fact, you can actually go swimming in the hot tub or in the hot pool, hot springs of the ruins of ancient Laodicea, where you can sit on the pillar from 2,000 years ago. You can sit on it. Like you're sitting there and they're like, oh, it feels so good. The bubble's coming up on you, whatever. And you're sitting on an old pillar from the old city of the ancient ruins. That's today. So let me ask you this. This was mineral hot springs. Anybody been to a mineral hot spring? You sit in there and they kind of have different things. They help you with your health because they got different minerals and stuff in there. You just kind of sit there, right? Well, what happens if you aqueduct the mineral spring water from Hierapolis to Laodicea? Because you're like, it would be really cool to have some hot springs here and to have all that beneficial mineral springs and bring it right here to town. What happens by the time it goes 6 miles by the aqueduct and it arrives in Laodicea? What happened to that hot water? It's lukewarm. It's the temperature of the air. Well, the other source, and you couldn't drink it, by the way, because it was full of minerals, so it wasn't any good for drinking. In fact, if you drank it, it would make you sick. It would make you throw up, right? It's kind of like when we go to the Dead Sea today, and I tell people it's awesome because you can float in the Dead Sea, right? Super cool, super relaxing. But anybody who's been there with me, I tell you, do not get this water in your mouth, in your eyes, in your nose, in other areas of your body, orifices we won't mention. Like, do not let it in because it's going to sting. It's not going to feel good at all. It's good for you, for your body, but not good for the inner part of your body, right? And so that's kind of the same thing with the water from Hierapolis. Well, the other source of water was Colossae, because Colossae sat at the base of Mount Cadmus, which was basically like frozen over. And so all this cool, refreshing mountain spring water would come down to Colossae, which is why early on it was like this refresh spot, right? You get there, you've been hiking for however many miles along the Roman road. I want to take a dip in the cool water. It feels good, right? I want to drink this mountain fresh water. Well, what happens when you take that mountain fresh spring water, cool, crisp water, and you pump it 10 miles from Colossae to Laodicea? What happens to that water? It gets warm. It becomes the temperature of the air around it. Anybody here after a hot day of playing soccer after RPL tonight, you want to get a nice big cup of lukewarm water? And that sounds real good, real pleasant, right? With all that in mind, listen to what he says in Revelation chapter 3. This is Jesus speaking to the church in Laodicea, either a representative church, could be the church age, could be us as individual believers. To the angel of the church in Laodicea, right, the last church. These are the words of the Amen, the faithful and true witness, the ruler of God's creation, Jesus speaking. I know your deeds. I know what's going on. I know what you're all about. That you are neither cold nor hot. I wish you were either one or the other. Either you were the hot springs and you have all those minerals and you kind of soothe jacuzzi tub water and it feels good, or the other, I wish you were the cold, refreshing mountain spring water that's just so good to drink. I wish you were one or the other. So because you are lukewarm, in the middle, neither hot nor cold, I am about to spit you out of my mouth. Anybody want God to think of you like I think of when I think of that first middle school night and I think of the rotten egg going in my mouth, and right? Anybody want that to be the thought that Jesus has of you? He's like, you don't have the benefits of the hot mineral water, and you don't have the benefits of the cool mountain spring, because by the time the water gets to you, it becomes the temperature of the air and the environment around it, and it's just lukewarm. In the middle. And it makes me sick. Man, I wish you were just one or the other, because you don't have either benefit. The one is good, the other is good, but the middle, no, it's not good. It's not what I want. Which begs the question, what do you think happened when Paul's letter to the Colossians was read in Laodicea? Does it appear that they took it to heart? Does it appear that they set their heart and their mind on things above? Does it appear that they took off the old self and the old clothes and threw them in the trash because they were gross and put on the new self? Did they clothe themselves with compassion and kindness and mercy and gentleness and faithfulness? All those things. Is that what it looks like? Or does it look like they just kind of said, well, sounds good, but we also have this from the world, and so we're kind of trying to do both, and so we're just becoming the temperature of the atmosphere around us, and that is lukewarm. And if this is the church age theory, and this is the final church before Jesus returns, are we, Rising Church, lukewarm? In the middle? Wishy-washy? Like, I kind of trying to do both. And if the seven churches represents individual believers and kind of their approach to God, are you the church of Laodicea? Is that the one that describes you? Don't get stuck in the middle. Go all in. So you can experience the glory that's coming, and you can start experiencing it now. Don't settle for less, because I'm telling you, so many believers, we're like, I got 1 foot in here, 1 foot in here, I can't decide, hot, cold, and we just end up lukewarm and kind of a little bit gross and disgusting. He's like, man, I wish you were one or the other. Be hot, be cold, but don't be in the middle. Just go, come on. Go all in. Because if you believe these things that they were saying about Jesus, if you have put in the mental effort necessary to think these things through, then he is worth going all in for. He is worth saying, man, that eternal glory that's awaiting me, that my grandfather and my father are experiencing right now, I'm going to go ahead and start gazing there, because I want to start experiencing a little bit of that, not just in the future, but right now, today. And that is available for every single one of us, but you can't have it if you're half in the world and half into God. You're stuck in the middle, mediocrity, just adapting to the air around you, and the atmosphere around you, and the culture around you, whatever they're saying. No, you're going to have to take a stand and say, no, I'm going to fix my eyes on things above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. And that's where I'm going to fix my gaze and my attention and my focus and my heart and my mind, because all this is temporary and that's eternal. And I want to experience the eternal, not just in the future, but today, right now, in this earthly life. Don't settle for less. Don't settle for less. Go all in. Experience the resurrected life today. Would you pray with me? Father, we thank you for your goodness. And we thank you for your kindness, and we thank you for your love. Father, I thank you that you always want better for us than anything we could ever come up with. And so, Father, I pray that you would help us to keep our eyes fixed on you. Help us to set our hearts, our feelings, our emotions on you. Help us to set our mind, our intellect, our rationale, our reasoning on you, not on earthly things. Because all this is temporary. All this is seen is going to go. But what is unseen is eternal. And Father, that's not just a future glory. That's a glory today that we can experience now with this resurrected life. If we will put to death our old life and its practices and its ways and its way of thinking and put on the new self. God, you have so much more, so much better. God, help us to desire that and to demand that. Not of you, but of ourselves, that we would not settle for less. That we would choose to take off these old practices. We would choose to put on the new self. We would choose compassion and love over hate. God, we would choose kindness over bitterness. We would choose forgiveness over resentment. God, we would choose to follow you. Father, I pray that you would help us as believers. God, I don't want to be Laodicea. God, I certainly don't want Rising Church to be Laodicea. God, help us to not settle for lukewarm, 1 foot in the world and 1 foot in the kingdom of heaven. You have transferred us out of the dominion of darkness and into the kingdom of light, into the kingdom of the Son you love. Let us take hold of that new life now, today. Not just the future glory that certainly awaits us. Let us experience it today. Now, that peace, that calm, that confidence, so we can stand firm, stand faithful, stand steadfast, even in a world that is shaking. Because our hearts and our minds are set on you. We praise in Jesus' name.